Drupalmatic, and today we're going to talk about what Drupal is. So here we're at Drupal.org, and we're going to talk about Drupal core and Drupal CMS and what the difference between the two are. Drupal CMS is basically a pre-built Drupal Drupal CMS solution. So it's a content management system for you to manage content, but it has additional modules installed on it as well and recipes, so that way you can get quickly started right away. Whereas Drupal core is more down to the bare bones, where you're just scaffolding a basic Drupal site, and then you can do a site install based on different profiles. So you can do a site install minimal, which installs minimal amount of items, or you can install you can use the standard Drupal profile to install, which will install some basic things like the olive arrow theme. And when we talk about what Drupal is and we talk about a content management system, for those who aren't familiar with what a content management system is, it's basically a tool that lets you create types of contents, so like a blueprint for what your content is. So for example, you say, okay, I want to have blog posts. So you would have a content type, and that content type can have fields on it, which are basically data points. So then you'd say, okay, I have a content type of a blog, and then I have fields on that blog, such as like a title field and a body field. So now you have your blueprint for your content, and now you can make nodes, which are basically, like an instance of your content type. So I say I have a content type of a blog, I have a title, I have a body. Now I can go and make blog posts with that data. So I say, okay, I want a new blog post. I fill out my title, I fill out my body field, and then once you have that data stored in there, you can then go and present that data in different ways and use that data as well. Which is the power of Drupal, is the fact that it's a content management system. That's kind of the difference between, using a Drupal CMS and using another framework. Is Drupal is a CMS at its core. So if you're building something and it's not the main feature of it isn't a content management system, then it doesn't make as much sense to use Drupal, because you're getting all this content management functionality out of the box, which then leads to functionality that you don't need, and maybe even over engineered. I would say the next thing I would note too when you're looking at Drupal is it's a PHP solution. The difference between like a Drupal CMS and another content management system is that you can really take Drupal and make it whatever you want. You can take Drupal, you can create your content types, and then you can extend that with modules that are contributed by the community, or you can write your own modules. So for example, if you say one of the things you could do if you wanted to is you could have a content type of a blog, and then when you go and publish that content type, you can then go and write a module to take that content and automatically publish it to YouTube using the YouTube API or whatever you want to do. So it's great because it's a content management system at its core, and then you can go and extend it to be whatever you want. Whereas the main feature of it is the content management system. And lastly, I would say, since we're talking about what Drupal is it's a great solution, but it's not something you would necessarily want to use if you're just making like a simple, small, static site. Because one of the things you're going to need with running Drupal is you're going to need a database, you're going to need a web server as well, and then you'll need to manage that server. So from my own personal experience on like side projects and stuff like that, like I love using Drupal, but it's not necessarily the best if you just have a simple static site that you want to build, because then you can very quickly use a static site generator, use a CSS library or something like that. And I'd say the last thing I would have to say about Drupal is that it has an upfront cost. So one of the things you can do with Drupal is you can do site building, which is basically saying like, oh, you can create pages, you can create views to list data out, and stuff like that without having to write any code. That's great. But the issue, not really the issue, but one of the things that you should note is that when you're starting with a Drupal site, if you want, your own theme, if you want to be able to have your own components and say like, oh, I want a card, I want an accordion and stuff like that, there's an upfront cost to that, because now you're going to have to go and make those components and those themes before you can actually then go and use them in the site building. Whereas if you're using a static site, for example, you can just go and import those components from a CSS library. So that's one of the main things I would say about Drupal is like there's more of an upfront cost, but once you pay that upfront cost, now you can go into your Drupal site, you can go into create a node, create your content. You can say like, okay, add a content item, you can add your data in there, and then you can have that render out using cards or whatever components you already have without having to go and customize anything additionally or do any additional work. And it really, the great thing about it is now that you can take someone who may not know how to program and can then go and create their own pages, create their own views, which is basically lists of data, without having to write any code. And also by not having to write any code and using the site building, you limit, the surface area you have with the amount of code you have and the amount of maintenance you need to do from custom code. And as well as when you go and upgrade your version of Drupal, you're also eliminating the need to have to go into that custom code and then upgrade it for a newer PHP version, for example. Drupal is built on top of Symfony. Symfony is a PHP framework, and you can use Symfony as components, or there's also the Symfony framework, and it follows the release cycle of Symfony. So that's one of the main things with the Drupal release cycle, is that when you upgrade from, let's say, Drupal 10.1 to 10.2, what they're doing is they're adding features. Whereas when you're upgrading from, say, Drupal 10 to 11, that's when they remove anything that's deprecated. So that's one of the important things if you have a lot of custom code that you write, instead of relying on like site building specifically. Not saying that custom code is necessarily bad, but now you need to go in and remove all that custom stuff or the deprecated stuff and replace it for the newer version of what you're using. So there's always those trade-offs, but I would say to summarize this, Drupal content management system, built off the Symfony PHP framework, majorly written in PHP, and could be overkill for simple sites. It's great if you need a content management system. You can really change it to whatever you want, with the core functionality being a content management system. And one of the great things about it is you can do site building, so you can create pages and do a lot of things without having to write any code if you're not someone who enjoys writing code, or if you just don't want to have that headache of maintaining that custom code. So that's all I have to say. I just wanted to come on here and just do a little rant about what Drupal is. Thanks. See ya.